Welcome to the Money Study Podcast with Jim Bishopp. In this podcast, we bring lessons on personal finance to life, helping you achieve the dignified retirement you deserve. Jim will guide you through practical financial strategies and tips to manage your money during your working life and through retirement. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Money Study with Jim Bishopp. Good afternoon, Jim. How are you?
I am living the dream every day, Eric.
I know it.
Yeah, sometimes the dream wakes me up in a cold sweat, but most of the time it's pretty good, man.
Well, my favorite thing is that I get to see you. Whenever we podcast together, I get to see you. You're doing great, man.
And how could that not be your favorite thing? No, I'm kidding, Eric. I appreciate it, man. It's great to be here and great to have fun, man.
Yeah. Well, I just want to talk to the listening audience for a moment. Here's the thing. The last podcast was Jim's inaugural podcast. So that was the one where really you get to know him, get to know a little bit about his business history, kind of what got him into it, what drives him, what his passions are. And then we talked a little bit about some personal things as well. So please go back and listen to that one. But I'm really excited to get into this podcast because this is the one where, Jim, you're going to kind of tell us from start to finish, and we'll just frame it up that way. If I hear this podcast or I get referred by a friend, which I know that most of your business comes in from referrals, if somebody refers me to you and I want to reach out and start that conversation, we're going to cover what happens from beginning until I become a client. Is that right?
Yep. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, let's just start off. I listen to the podcast, or maybe a friend of mine refers me, and I need to make that phone call. I've put it off way too long. I'll be honest, Jim. I put it off way too long. So I make the phone call. What happens?
Well, there's several ways you can get to us, right? So on our website, there's a bunch of places where you can click links to get to my calendar and get on my calendar that way, or you can just call the office. When that happens, we have a fairly good footprint with 10 advisors, so we'll try to figure out who the best fit in terms of our advisor team would be. So some of our advisors, if you're in Flagstaff, that might be Katie Wigman-Childers.
Okay.
If you're in Phoenix, we got a couple other advisors there. So just depending on where you were, we'll get you connected with the right person. Get a calendar set up. In this COVID era, that might be a Zoom meeting, but we'd rather do it nose to nose if we can. I know it's much more comfortable and I guess revealing to sit down together and get to know one another. But we'll do what we have to do. If it has to be Zoom, we'll do that.
Yeah.
And then we'll just start always with the question, how can we help? Because people call for lots of different reasons.
Well, I mean, again, I'm fairly social, Jim, to be quite honest with you. It's nice to meet in person, but I will say this: some of the meetings that I've had in sweats and bunny slippers, I'm okay with, right? I don't need to drive
we've
someplace.
gotten better at it, right? So I want to see the bunny slippers one of these days, though, Eric. But
you don't want to see them.
Okay. I probably don't. You're right. We've gotten good at Zoom, and we've ended up we can figure out how to make good connections and really connect with folks meaningfully over different platforms. So
yeah, all right. So I know that on the last podcast we spoke a little bit about your support staff, your team there. So if I'm calling in, am I reaching an advisor right away, or is there somebody that's kind of in charge of that?
No, there's somebody in charge of that. So I insist that we have a person answer our phone. Some of our millennials would rather we have a phone attendant of some kind, right? Mm-hmm. But we don't do that. Somebody's going to answer your phone, answer the phone, one of my admin staff, and they'll ask you some basic questions, try to figure out where you are geographically and how we can best serve you, and then we'll get you to the right person. We'll get you on their calendar directly.
All right. I know that from personal experience, and also I've been working with advisors for a very long time, one of the concerns is that a lot of people don't want to call in because they just are apprehensive, or they're like, geez, I really need to get my finances in order before I call somebody. I don't have really enough money to invest, and so on and so forth. And I know the population you serve are a lot of civil servants, teachers, firefighters, police officers. And we all know, and I think we all agree that most of them are underpaid, right? So maybe they don't feel like they have a need for a financial advisor, but they definitely have a need to get their financial house in order, but they shouldn't do that before they call you. So how can we help them overcome that concern about, I just don't have enough finances to worry about working with a financial advisor? What would you say to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is, I think everybody has enough finances to work with a financial advisor, because the early decisions you make in your life will have great impact on the long term. And maybe they're not things that we have a pre-made service for, right? So maybe we tell you, listen, these are the things we think you need to do on your own. You go pay down this credit card, you get $5,000 saved for an emergency fund, and then we'll check back in 6 months And when that's done, then we'll think about how to start saving for retirement and what those next steps are. So it's not always an immediate, actual client relationship. We may give you some homework and say, these are things you need to do to get that right. But nobody should be afraid or embarrassed to call us or any financial advisor who makes you feel bad should be ashamed of themselves, right? I didn't tell you this in the last podcast when we were talking about me, but I used to do martial arts. And one of the great things about martial arts is there's always somebody who can kick your teeth right down your throat, right? So if you get cocky or you get stupid or you get, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if you're a nice guy and you're trying to learn and trying to do better, everybody's very respectful. But if you get out of line, there's always somebody there. So I just feel like there's always something that you're better than me at, that you do well, that I don't. I just happen to do this well. So don't be embarrassed to call, and we're happy to help. Again, we even help a lot of kids of older clients. They'll call and say, I just got a job. What should I do? They have a 401k, they have an HSA. What should I do? And we'd love to counsel you on that. Even if it's not that client relationship sort of thing, we can help you to, figure out those hurdles. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I love that you brought that example up because I've also been into martial arts. I was into Muay Thai, Thai boxing for quite a while. But before then, it was Taekwondo. And I thought that I wasn't cocky necessarily, but my sensei, he was a great teacher. And I just thought, well, he's older.
Yeah.
I'm younger. I'm faster.
Right.
I was completely wrong. And when I say that he kicked my butt, Jim, I mean literally, he kicked me in the butt probably 15 times, and I never touched him. And I tried my hardest to do whatever. He didn't hit me anywhere else. Right. He kicked me in the butt, which then when I was looking back on it a few years later, it's like, he spanked me. He literally spanked me with his feet to teach me a lesson.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I say the same thing. Mine was a 4th degree, and I never hit the man ever. No matter. He knew where I was going before I even thought about going there. There you go. He's going to go left in a minute. Sure enough, the guy's behind me. You're like, what? Oh, there he is back there. Now I get it. There's always people better than I am at things and worse. And I think martial arts teaches you that. Sometimes you're the big dog, and sometimes you're not. And you have to be humble enough to ask for that help because it makes a lot of difference. Really will set your life on the right course if we get it right from the start.
Well, everybody's in a different stage, right? It's, speaking of martial arts, they're in different stages. You can tell by belts or certifications, whatever that is. Yeah. But people that are in, their own financial journey, everybody's in a different stage. So I love the fact that you started this off with, look, we may not start working together right away, but we're going to set you on that right path to where we can work together more effectively. Yeah. So let's take that as a hypothetical, right? I've got my emergency fund that you've suggested. Right. I've paid down some of my debts. I don't have a ton of extra money, but at the same time, I have less debts, and I feel more secure about where I'm at. So I do have a little bit extra that I need to figure out something to do with. I'm going to re-engage you, or maybe you've called me out of the blue and said, hey, look, it's been 6 months. How are things going? I say, great, thank you so much. This is, I put those things in place. Now what do we do, Jim?
Yeah. So then, anybody on my team, me or any of my advisors, is going to start trying to figure out where you are in life, right? Are we... Do you have a new family? Do we have enough risk management in place? If you die or become disabled, do we have things in place to take care of that? Are we ready to start saving for retirement? If you have young children, should we be thinking about college education funds, right? I can put just a tiny amount of money away every month for college education, and it's fairly painless to do. I don't want to say painless, but it's, it doesn't hurt too badly to put away a few bucks for that college education. So we'll try to figure out what it is that you want to accomplish, and figure out the path to make that happen.
All right. Yeah. All right. That sounds pretty good. Now, I know, again, speaking of concerns of when people don't reach out or maybe why they don't reach out sometimes, is unfortunately a lot of times financial advisors get a bad rap, right? Insurance folks get a bad rap. Realtors can get a bad rap because people just don't know. And I think the concern is, well, they're going to try to sell me something. So when I'm coming to you, what are we looking at as far as what's my overall investment working with you, Jim?
Nothing. So if we don't charge fees. We don't charge you a consultation fee. We don't charge you a financial planning fee. We don't charge you any of that. If you engage us for the purpose of money management, or we recommend an investment or an insurance product, maybe they'll have a commission attached to them. So we'll disclose those as as we get to a product or solution recommendation, but there's no cost for you to come and talk to me, have a phone call with me, a Zoom meeting, sit in my office.
Awesome.
There's no out of pocket. So that shouldn't be a barrier to entry for anyone.
Okay, that's fantastic. So if we've had this conversation on the phone, now it's kind of over Zoom, what things should I have ready and prepared? And how do I know that? So how do I know what I need to have to even meet with you to begin with, or maybe that second meeting? What should I be thinking about?
Yeah. So some advisors will have a printed out sort of recommended sheet. You should bring anything that you can think of that will be relevant to your financial life. So, and we can send you things. We do have one of these, but often so I'll give you some examples. I want bank statements. I'll want investment statements, insurance policies, any estate planning documents, wills, powers of attorney, trusts. We'd like to see how you've done there, right? Because that's an important piece.
Yeah.
And then, so we can send you a email that outlines those things. Bring those with you. But if you don't, we'll send you a follow-up. We'll say, listen, you didn't bring this or that. We talked about that. Maybe it didn't cross your mind. Send it to me. Email it, fax it, send it over, walk it over, whatever you want to do. But our process is pretty informal, and we try to make it comfortable, so it's not, it's not super regimented and strict. We can have a nice dialogue about what you want to talk about and what's important to you and getting to where you want to go. All
right. Well, in the last podcast, I asked you specifically about who you work with, kind of who is your ideal client. Yeah. And you named a few different, not criteria, but kind of some things that you're looking for, civil servants and a lot of teachers, a lot of firefighters. So give me an example of a teacher or firefighter family, kind of your average client that would come in the door, and what does that look like once we get the recommendations and you've kind of sat down, here's what I see as far as what your goals are. How do we start to implement that plan or execute what you're talking about?
Yeah. So let's assume for a minute that the goal is retirement, right? Because that's mostly where we start is retirement. Some of the college savings or savings for a second home or whatever is in that, but almost everybody has this objective of retirement. So we have a couple of tools available to us, right? One of them we call Educator Financial Analysis. It's a little simpler for younger folks. It can take a very quick look at the state retirement system, the public safety pension, but the pension income, Social Security, and then any other savings they have, project that out to a retirement date, literally 10 minutes worth of data input, and we can see if you're on track for savings or for your retirement. And then from there, we'll talk about, is the money that you have invested today, is it invested in a manner that you think is appropriate, that we think is appropriate, that's on track? And maybe we'll make additional recommendations for additional savings or insurances or estate planning, things like that, but just depending on what you have, but we'll start through that path. I'll also say, I learned a long time ago, originally I tried to plug every hole that every person came in with. You need an estate plan, you don't have enough life insurance, your disability's short, and you need some, long-term savings. People just tailspin at that, right? They just can't take all that in. So our process, we try to manage it gradually. We try to we try to look at what they have today, what the most pressing issue is, and solve that. And then through regular conversations in the future, we'll tackle each of those other items as we go. But we try not to be overwhelming in the amount of things we try to fix right out of the gate.
All right. Well, that sounds good because I don't like to be overwhelmed.
I don't like to be overwhelmed either. I'll tell you one other thing. Service is a big deal, right? So the initial part is great, but I say my standard line is you don't have to look for me. I'll find you. I'll call you regularly. We'll communicate with you. We'll tell you what you need to know. We'll prompt you to come and meet with us, have a conversation about where you are, how we're doing, how our investments are performing, what things we think you ought to tweak or change. So we'll walk you through that, and we'll reach out to you. That being said, I work for you. If you're a client of ours, you have our phone number. Call us anytime you have a concern, but we'll work very hard to make sure that we're proactive in the communication process.
Well, Jim, that's actually the perfect kind of transition to my next question is, how often are we meeting? How often should I expect appointments? And I know from experience that financial advisors really kind of want to know what's going on in your life when something major happens. Can you kind of highlight those? I mean, obviously it's a two-part question, right, Jim? How often are we meeting? And then what kind of life events do you want to be aware of that will help you serve me best?
So for most of my personal clients, they tend to be a little bit older and a little further into retirement. We meet every 6 months. Some of our other advisors, for younger folks, it's a little more autopilot, so we can get them started and get them moving. So an annual review is might be more appropriate. But it is mutual accountability, right? So if there's something in your life that you need help with or you need counsel on, we're there to help, right? So we have clients call us about reverse mortgages or car loans or kids' college or budgeting. I mean, just anything, we're there. We may not have all of the answers or all of the resources, but we can usually point you in the right direction. So I guess I'm not answering your question specifically, but really any life event that you need some counsel on, we're there to help with. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great start. And I think anybody would say, well, if I'm going to get an inheritance, I should probably call.
Right.
Of course.
Sure.
If I've hit Powerball, definitely call.
Right.
Those are the kind of the things. But I think a lot of people forget that, well, your daughter just said that she wants to get married.
Yeah.
And one of your goals has always been to help her with her wedding. Well, 10,000 or, when we can have weddings again, right, Jim?
Right. Zoom reduced the cost of the wedding, I think, a little bit, right, for most people. But
I'm surprised that Zoom hasn't started, taking a cut.
I'm surprised they don't too. Great idea. I'm going to call Zoom. Yeah, start a new service.
Yeah, there you go. Business idea.
Right.
But those are the types of things, and I love the fact that you brought up car loans.
Yep.
Right. I mean, a major purchase decision is something you should probably, especially in those years, call your financial advisor.
Sure.
Just say, hey, what do you think? Should we finance? I know that there's some pretty good deals right now, or should we, prepare to pay some cash for this? So, no, I love that.
I think that's a big deal, right?
That.
I mean, so if you're going to finance something, what do you have to pay to finance it versus what can I earn or what's in my investment account? And so that's how we try to weigh that out. And through my career, there's been times when paying it off cash was a way better proposition because rates were very high. And in the current environment, often, making payments is not the worst thing because the interest rates are so low. So we'll help you to weigh those out over, any of those decisions. Kids,
and I would...
Eric, I was going to tell you, kids are a big deal too, right? I mean, and I think I've mentioned this before, but we often get our, older clients whose kids are graduating college or making some financial decisions. We're happy to help them make those decisions too, counsel them on benefits and new jobs and even compare jobs, equal salaries, but what do their benefits look like? So.
Yeah, that is a big deal.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing that I never thought of before I was in this situation, Jim. My wife lost her mind when we had grandkids. I had no idea. That pretty much set my retirement back a couple of years, and I was not prepared. But I'm like, what happened to you?
Oh, yeah.
She's so...
Oh, yeah. And, you talk about one spouse or the other losing their mind, and it's not always the wife. It's often the husband, too. I tell people all the time, I'm like a referee. I should wear a striped shirt and a whistle and, ready to wrestle, right? Because we're half marriage counselor, too, because not always, couples don't always have the same opinions about money and what the priority is. So try to help you navigate that as best we can, too.
Yeah, what it's basically meant for me is I don't get a boat.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. That's fine. I got grandkids. Yeah. They're fantastic.
Nod like an idiot and go, yep, okay, honey, right? That's what I thought we were gonna do. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And one of the things you mentioned earlier is a lot of the clients that you work with specifically are just entering retirement or they're kind of in their retirement years, and this last year has posed kind of a concern for a lot of folks in a lot of ways, whether they were just starting to retire or they were thinking I'm going to be able to retire next year or the year after. Maybe those plans have changed, and if people have those concerns coming to you maybe for the first time, what can you do to help them at this point? I mean, it's kind of late in the game. Are there some tips and tricks you've got?
Sure. I mean, investment strategies can be, in terms of investment risk, we can be all over the spectrum from, I used to say pork bellies, right, on one spectrum. Now it's Bitcoin on one spectrum and, a coffee can in the yard on the other. So investments can be anywhere along that, that spectrum, from very aggressive, very conservative. We can help them manage that, look at how much they're saving every year, what their lifestyle looks like. A lot of tools out there that that we can call upon to help with that. Along those lines too is understanding the amount of market risk we take is hard, right? So it's one thing for me to say to you, Eric, it's entirely possible you could lose 20% of your value in a downturn. Okay, but when you're 20 years old and you got $2,000 in the bank, 20% is one number. When you're nearing retirement and you've got $500,000 in your 401k, 20% is a whole different ballgame. So we have some tools that help to model how a portfolio is structured and then what that downside might look like, so you have some better understanding, so you're not shocked when something happens. So, yeah.
Well, and this is the reason I really, really wanted to have this podcast, and I was excited to do this one with you, is because there's a lot of programs out there, right? And one thing I know that we're not going to hear on this program is that this is what you need to be doing, or this is what you should not be doing,
Right?
Because each person is so individualized, and you've drilled that into my head just through our private conversations. There's no one size fits all, and unfortunately, there's a lot of people on the radio right now that are saying never do this or never do that, because it kind of instills fear in folks. There are tools that might actually work really, really well for your specific scenario, and without having this discussion, sitting down and laying out exactly what your situation is, people just won't know.
Yeah. My staff say I have these little Jimmy-isms, right? But I say my job is to make you as much money as I can without taking more risk than you can tolerate. So being able to articulate what that risk looks like is huge. And those tools don't really take into the account the human or emotional factor, because I really want to, we're going to be brutally honest with you about what the downside can look like, because my litmus test for having taken too much risk in a good market is if you call me in a down market and say, I can't stand it, I want out. I did not explain to you carefully enough what that downside might look like. So I want you, when we have a downside, we have a market correction, and, in this business, we are going to lose money from time to time. If you're invested, there are things we can do to not do that, but for most people, we're going to lose money from time to time, and you need to know what that looks like. And when it happens, you need to be able to put your head in the sand and just not lose your mind over it. And so a lot of what I do is expectation management, making sure that I tell people, another Jimmyism, when the markets are difficult, sometimes I have to push you out to the edge of the cliff and make you take a little more risk. And when they're really good, I have to talk you out of, tell you that eventually you're going to hit that cliff and we need to pull back a little bit. So managing those expectations are important.
Yeah, well, and it was so funny because one of the conversations I had with my own son early on was, well, I'm just not going to invest, because it was during a time that was pretty scary. It was around 2009, and I think you remember that time.
I do.
Well, I'm just not going to invest. It's just better, I'll just keep my money in my closet. He was young.
Right.
I'm like, okay. So I said, are you going to make money?
Yeah.
Well, no, but I'm not losing money.
Right.
Yes, you are, son. And I had to explain to him inflation. I had to explain to him all sorts of different things about, that's not how it works.
Hiding your money in a closet, Eric, is a go broke slowly strategy, right? Because inflation is cost of stuff you want to buy is going to keep going up, and your money is going to stay right there. So there is a risk to that as well.
Yeah, that was an important lesson for a 13-year-old.
Yeah, good. Your son's got you to help with that, man. Yep.
He's outgrown that stage, So it took, he got a little smarter. So I still can't take credit for that.
Well, mom and dad had an influence, I bet.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we've talked about the process. We've talked about kind of what the communication looks like. Anything else we need to know for today's podcast? Because we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah. I guess one other thing we didn't touch on, all that we do quite a bit of, so we're not estate planning attorneys, but we really try to help our clients make sure they're paying good attention to beneficiaries and contingencies. We've just seen someday, Eric, when I retire, I'm going to write a book on what happens when people die and the train wrecks we've seen over the years. But making sure that your estate's in good order and your assets are where they need to be, and they're going to the people that you want them to go to in the right way, and the right people are making decisions about them. So we can help you think about that, get you to an estate planning attorney with a proper mindset, so that you can get those things in good order. So that's another really important thing that I think we coach or counsel most of our clients to at least think about.
Absolutely. All right. Before I close this down, I want to ask you the most important part of this. If people are listening to this podcast and they're saying, you know what, I'm not going to hesitate anymore, I'm not going to procrastinate, whether they're saying, hey, this is a New Year's resolution for me, or just, I've had some goals that I really need to start working on. How do they get a hold of you if they want to begin this conversation?
Yeah, I really hope they do, no matter what stage of life they're in and where they're, what they're doing. I think we can help most folks, but they can call us directly off the website. Our phone number's on there. If they do, they'll get to one of my staff people. We'll try to figure out exactly who on my team is the right person to work with them. Again, as I think we've talked about in other podcasts, we have folks in Flagstaff and other geographic locations. So depending on where you're calling from, we'll get you to the right person, and we'll get you on that person's calendar for an initial conversation. No cost, no obligation, no pressure. Come and chat. If we can help you and you like what we have to say, then we'll figure that out, but no cost to do that, and we'll get you there. You can also use the internet. You send us an email. There's links to calendars, so if you know who you want to talk to on my team, you can just link on their calendar and get right to them. So try to make it easy for you to reach out.
All right. Sounds good. Jim, again, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Eric. I really enjoy it, man. A lot of fun.
All right. Again, it was my pleasure, Jim. And the last thank you, of course, goes to your listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to The Money Study with Jim Bishopp. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Jim comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friend, family, and colleagues. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at SJI Financial Services Incorporated, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Money Study Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speaker and/or the guest and may not necessarily reflect those held by Voya Financial Advisors. Comments concerning the past performance of monetary instruments, investment indexes, or international markets are not intended to be forward-looking and should not be viewed as an indication of future results. Investment advisor representative and registered representative of and securities and investment advisory services offered through Voya Financial Advisors, Inc., member SIPC. SJI Financial is not a subsidiary of nor controlled by Voya Financial Advisors.